Perfect. And we are recording, everybody. So thank you for joining us this evening for our virtual conversation with Tori Olsson and audiobook narrator Roger Clark. I'm Sara Beth Haring. As I already mentioned, I am a marketer here at St. Martin's Press. We are part of the publishing house known as Macmillan, and I am pleased to have helped bring out the hardcover and ebook edition. We actually have a separate team for our audio edition that Roger worked with a lot more closely than he worked with me, but I'm pleased to have a chance to get to work with him tonight. And I just wanted to provide a quick introduction to our stars tonight. We have Tori Olsson, who is an award-winning historian of the United States since, I guess, it's from the Civil War period to, I guess, present day. And he is also a professor at the University of Tennessee. He has devoted much of his career to making history relevant and accessible to the public. In fact, that's why he created the first ever college history course based on the Red Dead Redemption games, which we have a student here. And that was actually what led him to wanting to write a book, which you guys have all pre-ordered, so thank you. Tori was also born in Sweden, but he immigrated to the US in 1990. And I have a feeling, like many of you guys here and ladies, you spent most of your youth behind the video game monitor. Quick intro to Roger. Roger, actually, I just see here, you were born in New Jersey and you were raised in am I saying this right? Is it Sligo? And you were trained in the UK? He is best known for his portrayal of Arthur Morgan in Rockstar Games Red Dead Redemption 2. He is the winner of the Best Performance at the 2018 Game Awards, and he has been a professional actor since 2000, and he has actually transitioned to also becoming a producer recently. He has been working in theater, voiceover, audiobooks, film, television, and has worked in nearly 50 countries, which is amazing. And you now live in Connecticut with your family. And as I already said, this is going to be like a Q&A format, but please jump in anytime if you have any questions, and just, please be respectful and kind, and try to keep the conversation tied to the book and or video game. And I hear a little hand. Yes, Mark.
Tori, I'm the Thomas that IM'd you this morning and got the link from Facebook. Just wanted to say hi. This is the genius move, tying American history to a video game, and Rockstar being known for their painstaking accuracy. And I listened to I got the audiobook and I listened to the whole thing in like a day. And I just thought that was fabulous. And I thought you did a fantastic job. Definitely one to listen to over and over again, especially for Mr. Clark's rendition of Arthur. And I hope you're not anywhere near the flooding that's going on that I heard in Connecticut, Roger. That's good. That's good.
No, so far so good. Thanks for your concern.
Yeah, I saw that today, and it's like a foot of rain in 24 hours in certain areas, and it's flooding. So good. Glad to hear that. And yeah, I hope people don't lose anybody in that. And that's it. That's all I had for now.
Awesome. Great. I wanted to lead into one of my questions kind of based on what you just said. We were so excited, especially Tori, when you agreed to be the audiobook narrator. Is this your first audiobook that you have narrated, or have you done, I guess actually in your bio, you've said you've done others. What have been some of your past projects? How has doing this audiobook been different for you? Did you picture Arthur Morgan in your mind when you were talking, which I'm sure you did?
So audiobooks are kind of in my blood. My father used to, speaking of New Jersey, my father used to put the Star Ledger on cassette tape back in the 80s. And I would help him cut out the newspaper articles. And we would record 6 cassettes at a time. And those would go off to the visually impaired and the blind that wanted that in the region of North New Jersey. So I started in this field about 6-7 years old.
Nice.
I think I've narrated close to 200 audiobooks now, somewhere around 200. I've been doing it for over a decade professionally. As you can probably tell, this is in my basement, and it's very good. It's very good for soundproofing this way. But when my children are running directly above, I have to open the door and then ask them to calm down. But no, when I was approached with this, well, first of all, I was completely gobsmacked that someone of such an academic position, such as Dr. Olsson, would have been interested in our work when we were working together with Rockstar Games to make Red Dead Redemption 2. And I was very, very curious when I heard that he was putting on a lecture at the University of Tennessee, and then to be approached with this wonderful book, which is accessible to both layman and academic alike. I couldn't help but get my teeth sunk into it, and I learned a lot narrating it. It was probably one of my favorite narrations that I have done. A lot of academics, they write what looks really good on the page, but when you're trying to make it sound out loud, it not often isn't the case. I can say that Tori is definitely not guilty of that, and it was a joy to use his work. Whenever people compliment me on my narration, I always say a chef is only as good as his ingredients, and it is true. And it was an honor to be asked, and I've really enjoyed watching all of you enjoy his work over the last week, 10 days or so as well. And thank you for both of us. I didn't do much, but I know that Tori is very, very, very thrilled with the reception that we've been getting, and it's very well deserved. And yeah, thank you.
Thanks. Tori, I want to throw it over to you. I have a question. What was it like writing Red Dead Redemption? What was your process? Did you drive your wife crazy, like playing the games over and over and over to make sure you got something just right?
Yeah, thanks so much, Sara Beth, and thanks so much for organizing this. And
of course,
Roger,
I'm sorry about the technical difficulties there.
Yeah, no, we're all good. And thank you all so much for joining on a Tuesday evening, or wherever the time might be. Oh my gosh. I'm clearly a little scattered, huh? So, yeah, this book has such a crazy history, because it didn't start out with me thinking, oh, I'm going to write a book about a video game, because that would have been unthinkable just a couple of years ago, because I was really not in that sort of mindset at all. But it all came out of the pandemic, in that the pandemic brought me back to video games, not for professional reasons, but just as a hobby, as some way to pass the time during pandemic lockdowns. Now, I had been a video gamer 20 years earlier when I was in high school, but I had laid off video games for a really, really long time, for 2 decades. And then the pandemic got me back in. And of course, one of the first games that I played was Red Dead Redemption 2. And I was just floored at how, fleshed out this historical world was that the writers and developers and actors, of course, created. Not all of it was historically accurate in a traditional sense, but it was really thoughtful. It was really interesting. It was really provocative and getting people excited about this turn of the century moment in American history. So back in 2021, I decided to teach a class on it, as you mentioned, Sara Beth, the world's first ever college history class on the Red Dead Redemption games. I have a couple of my students in the room at the moment, so much shout outs to them. They had to deal with me as part of this experiment. And it was only after finishing the first semester that I had this idea, sitting on kind of this hard work of the semester, sitting on a big stack of lectures that I'd prepared and activities that I'd prepared, lots of gaming. You mentioned driving my family crazy with gaming. Yes, I've played a lot of Red Dead Redemption 2, both before and after teaching the class. But more time was really spent reading on the topics that the game broaches, but doesn't always contextualize. So I had to teach myself a great deal about the Pinkertons, about what real cowboys were doing in this period, what Civil War monuments actually looked like in the 1890s. So I learned a tremendous amount as I was preparing for the class. And then once I decided to write a book, to try to repackage the adventure that I'd taken my students on and make it available to the wider world, well, then I cranked into high gear, both playing a lot more and then reading a ton more as well. So it's kind of a crazy road that led me to this, beautiful book that I've been holding, very cherishingly in my hands for the last few weeks. But I'm so glad that it's out in the world, and I'm so glad you guys are enjoying it. And I'll never forget the day when I learned that Roger agreed to serve as the audiobook narrator, because I went running down the hall of my academic building, screaming basically at the top of my voice. I was so excited, so honored, and so thrilled to be working with such a, legend in acting, in performance capture, in video games. So this really was like the perfect marriage of author and narrator. It couldn't get any better. So to sit here with Roger is just like a dream come true.
And we really were so excited. Okay, so I had a feeling that you were going to have a lot of questions, and I'm thrilled. So apologies, everyone, for keeping you waiting. Julian, please unmute yourself and feel free if you have a question still, unless it's already been answered, to take over the floor.
So I had two questions. I almost got stolen with the Roger question, but I came up with another one. But yeah, so one thing I was interested, I'll start with Tori's question. I was really interested in your process for the photography curation. I was really curious because I think they're really interesting, even just the way that they're framed on the page. I find it's just the fact that you chose not to almost inflate them beyond the size that kind of it feels it should be, or even just the pictures you chose. I don't know. I found it almost had it gave almost a scrapbook quality, which I thought was really interesting and organic for the way that you're telling the story. So I'd love to hear some of your insight on that.
Yeah, sure thing. Thank you so much for the question. It was great seeing you in Deadwood, by the way. It was so awesome. So yeah, this is one thing that the audiobook listeners don't get. They don't get the pictures, because a picture is worth 1,000 words, and you can't really do it on audiobook, no matter what Roger's talents might be. So yeah, there's these 20 images in the book, each of which open a chapter. And in trying to decide which ones to pick, one really important limiting factor was that I wanted to use images from the Library of Congress's image database. And part of the reason is because they provide free images that are really high quality there. It's an incredible resource. And they're also open access. They're free to use in publishing without paying permissions and all that sort of thing. And, it can be very expensive to use certain images for certain purposes. So I know my publisher, right, was very eager to have open access, copyright free images. But, the Library of Congress is open to, they have such vast holdings. Just go on there and browse. Just type in 1899, for example, and you'll see tens of thousands of images just from that year that are available in these massive, 100 megabyte TIFF files that you can sit and zoom in on for hours, which is really cool. So I think once I knew I was getting it from that database, I just kind of dove in and chose certain keywords. Some of these images are very famous. For example, like the segregated movie theater entrance in Mississippi at the turn of the century. So I knew I wanted really famous, iconic images that would communicate the sort of content of the chapter. But some of them I just came across by searching in the database, right? Like I typed in New Orleans, 1899, and I found this amazing photograph of St. Charles Avenue with a streetcar on it that looked pretty much exactly like a scene from Red Dead Redemption 2, right, in Saint Denis. It was just like, maybe that was the photo that Rockstar developers had used to model Red Dead Redemption 2's city. You never know. So some of the choices were very easy, but it was very fun selecting those images. So I'm so glad that you like them.
Awesome. Yeah, thank you so much. And then, hi, Roger. So my original question was about your process and your history with audiobooks, because I did a show and I was actually recommended a different audiobook that you did called Dead Acre. And I loved that as well. Very similar cowboy vibes. But I was wondering, so I know that audiobook in particular can be somewhat taxing in terms of sessions. So I was wondering, how do you best prepare yourself for a session? Do you have a routine that you go into?
Yes, I absolutely do. My routine has changed over the years. When I first began, I didn't have my own studio. You're literally looking where I recorded the audiobook right now. I forgot to raise that earlier, but I thought it would be taken for granted. But yeah, you might like to know, this was the microphone. This is where I am. This is where I do a lot of my recording these days by myself. Now, that wasn't the case at the beginning, though. I used to hop on the train to Newark, which was Audible's national headquarters. We'd go to Broad Street, and there we would work with a technician, and we would typically do it in 5 or 6 hour blocks. And it can be time consuming, so I would try to prep whatever I could beforehand. I usually typically proofread a book twice before I start recording. The first time I'll look for all the words I don't know how to pronounce. And then the second time, then I'll be getting more into the storyline, and if whether it's fiction or whatnot, I'll maybe characterize a few voices in my head for certain roles, and then we get started. But in more recent years, I started recording by myself, especially when COVID happened. I mean, we didn't really have much other choice. The audiobook industry has changed a lot in the last couple of years, and I'm thrilled to still be a part of it. And yeah, it's quite solitary as opposed to other acting mediums, which makes it very, very unique in a lot of ways. But at the same time, I feel really privileged to be able to make an author's work more accessible, bring it to a larger audience, especially with something like I have done history books before, nothing pertaining to previous work in other mediums. I've done a lot of history books, and I love history. And like I said before, some books are more accessible than others, and the way Tori writes, it just flows off of not just the page, but also my tongue. And I think it was a real privilege to work on it. But yeah, my process has changed over the years. And now all I really look for is a nice, comfortable chair. I need to get a nicer chair because my back's killing me.
And that actually kind of leads into a question I wanted to ask. I learned so much about how you actually recorded Red Dead Redemption 2. Like, I was under the misconception that, it was all voice acting, but I was utterly amazed when I learned that you did so much more. You brought your whole motion, full body into bringing your character to life. Do you think that, like, you said you're sitting in your chair, but did you bring any motion when you were recording the book? Performance capture, thank you.
The book, not so much, but yeah, everybody thinks video games. Most people still think the majority of performances in gaming is done in not dissimilar to this, and that's because that's how it used to be. That's how it started out. But now, most of it now is performance capture, and we all know performance capture. We've seen behind the scenes. Most of us have, at least, for films like Avatar and Planet of the Apes now, and
Yeah,
we're seeing it more and more in film.
it's amazing.
But gaming has been doing that for on 2 decades now, so it's not that dissimilar to film, other than you're wearing spandex and you're looking slightly ridiculous. But the scenes still need to be memorized. You still need to work with your colleagues and alongside with your director and knock out that scene until the director's happy. And that's one of the reasons why games are taking a little longer to make now, because I think that performance capture, when you're working in tandem, side by side and face to face with your fellow actors, those scenes can and often do tend to be a lot more immersive. And as opposed to if I was just reading off of a script in a booth by myself, like they both are amazing mediums that pose their own challenges. But I'm so passionate about performance capture, and it's one of the things that I enjoyed the most about making Red Dead Redemption 2. But there was a little bit of voice acting in there too. Maybe about 10% of my work was done in a booth. So I'm not no stranger to the inside of one, but I'm no stranger to spandex either.
I have to ask, what color was your spandex? Was it lime green?
It was blue and black. Yes, and I wore boots. I still wore cowboy boots. Actually, I could go and get them for you now. I'll be right back.
Okay.
But if you want to move on to another question, go ahead. I'll just going to be like 10 seconds, but this will give you a better idea.
All right, I will ask a question and then I'll go back to the chat in case Holly Marie's question is for you, Roger. Let's see, a question for Tori. Tori, I always want to say Tori. I'm so sorry, Roger. Tori. What is your opinion about like how the characters actually speak in the game? Is that how you picture people of that time period actually speaking, or is it different?
Yeah, great question. So one of the things I think the game does really nicely is that it has such a huge diversity of accents, right? There's people who are kind of groomed city slickers, there's Southerners, there's Midwesterners, there's all kinds of regional accents. Like, no one speaks the same way. And I think that's totally accurate because the West at this period was such a tremendous melting pot. I mean, very few non-native peoples were from this place, right? In the 1890s, many of them were recent settlers from the East, and they would be such a tremendous mix of sort of accents and ways of speech. So it's accurate in that sense. I think the big debate that's worth continuing about how people speak in the game has to do with the levels of cursing, because if you compare Red Dead Redemption 2 to another very famous pop cultural sort of imagination of late 19th century West, that would be Deadwood. And the levels of profanity in Deadwood are nothing close to that of Red Dead 2, in that they way exceed the video game in so many ways, right? I mean, every other word is in, if you watch the show, you know how it goes. And there's pretty minimal cursing in Red Dead Redemption 2. I mean, there's a couple, maybe a few F words, not all that much. And I think that both Deadwood and Red Dead Redemption 2 are kind of off the mark. They both would have probably met somewhere closer to the middle. Dead was a little over the top, and Red Dead 2 would have had more cursing, especially among the working class people, right? Like the kind of well-educated people like Trelawney and maybe even Dutch. Like, I don't know what Dutch's background is, but he's got some schooling, middle class culture in the late 1800s was very averse to cursing. Like, they didn't even call it chicken breasts. They call it a chicken bosom, which is hilarious, They didn't like to use the word legs. They used the word benders instead, because legs was just legs was too, sensual and too physical, which is hilarious. Middle-class people didn't swear much, but working-class people, like Arthur, for example, Arthur's a very smart and thoughtful guy, but he's not a book-learned guy. He's not an educated man. He would have dropped more profanity, as I imagined it. But of course, people are different. There's no one-size-fits-all mold.
100%. Let me see. I'm going to hand the mic over temporarily to Holly Marie. Are you also a double first name like me?
No, just middle name.
Gotcha.
Hi, Mr. Clark. Hi, Mr. Olson. Thank you so much for being here. We all, I think I can say, appreciate it. So I've got a question for both of you, and they run in the same vein. Mr. Olson, what was the most fascinating part of the book to write? And Mr. Clark, what was the most fascinating to record?
Yeah, thank you so much for that question, Holly. So I have to confess that my favorite part of this book is in the Deep South, in part because the chapter in Lemoyne is my very favorite chapter in the game. And I also am trained primarily as a Southern historian. I got my PhD at the University of Georgia, and I now teach at the University of Tennessee. So I've been a Southerner for a long time. And I'm really, really fascinated with the paradoxical ways that the history of this region has played out, and how it's shaped America, how it's really shaped the bigger country in ways that most people don't always imagine. So like the chapters on like Confederate memorials and the Confederate flag, those were really meaningful to me as someone who's lived in this region for a long time, because it helps me overturn some of the stereotypes and myths about those historical objects. So I love the deep Southern elements. I love the Western parts. I love the Appalachian parts, but the Deep South is very much intellectual and metaphorical home for me.
Hi, Holly. Well, before I answer your question here, as promised, these are Arthur Morgan's boots.
Are those spurs?
These are the
Are
boots.
those the little dots that do the movement?
These have reflective surfaces on them, which I won't say cameras, because they're not cameras, but they're scanners. They pick up each individual ball, and judging by the way the performer moves, they're then able to translate that data into algorithms that then render Arthur onto the screen, or whatever character or NPC that they may want to use that day. So yes, we wore cowboy boots, obviously, so that our gait was correct and accurate. And a lot of the people playing native characters would wear sneakers. But other than that, we looked very similarly in that we had very tight lycra on. Sometimes we also wore gun belts too, if the scene called for it. Anything that we had to interact with, that would be there. We had amazing set builders who would build dimensionally accurate sets, but to look at it, it was all just pipes and scaffolding. But to answer your question, Holly, and thank you for it, by the way. My favorite parts were the things when I learned something new. I learned something new in particular about Jim Crow laws. I didn't know that they didn't start rearing in the South until the 1890s, 30 years after the end of the Civil War. I had no idea about that. And then Dr. Olsson raises the really good point about all of these Confederate memorial statues. They would have been brand new at the time of Red Dead Redemption 2. Obviously, I think Rockstar Games gave themselves a bit of artistic license. It is historical fiction. Geographically speaking, it's nowhere near accurate to our America, although it's very clearly a carbon copy of that. But I think they allowed themselves some discrepancies. Another thing that Dr. Olsson really points out well is the fact that most of the violent interactions between the U.S. government and the feds and the Native American population, most of that had been kind of put to an end by the 1890s, which the game obviously doesn't reflect for action and thrilling purposes, I'm assuming. But there was a lot of things that I learned, and those were the things that I was most passionate and excited about.
Thank you both so much.
Thanks, Holly. Casey, you are up next in the queue.
Hi. I have a question for both of you. I was wondering if there were any specific historical events or historical figures that you would have liked to have seen featured in Red Dead Redemption 2. I think we all know Rockstar paid meticulous detail to a lot of things. I just would like to know if there was anything specific you would have liked to have seen. I know personally, I think it would have been interesting to see a little bit of the newsboys strike that took place in 1899, where the newsboys stand on the corner of the street. Maybe we could have gotten a little detail where they threw their newspapers down and walked away. I think that would have been really interesting to see.
Yeah, totally. What a great question. Thank you for posing it. I think there's two things I'd love to see more than anything in Red Dead 2 that would have made it like so much more accurate, because these two topics were of tremendous significance to people at the time, but are almost entirely absent in the game. So if it was being remade and remastered into a new version, I'd like to see the labor movement, like strikes and labor unions that are coming together and resisting big businesses, because this is a major part of American life. And then I want to see party politics, because we live in a moment when party politics is so powerfully dominant, and society feels so divided and torn in two. Well, guess what? That was exactly the same thing in 1890s America, maybe even more so, because the voter participation rates at that time were significantly higher than they are today. So I want to know, what was Arthur Morgan's partisan identity? Because even outlaws, and I might even say especially outlaws, had political identities. And in fact, many of them decided who they were going to shoot based on their politics and the victim's politics. So this was not something out of the way. But I'll tell you, my guess, we had a long discussion about this in my class about what party would Arthur Morgan vote for. And we decided that he would actually be a populist, which is this third party movement of the late 1800s, especially in the 1880s and 1890s. And we decided he would be a populist. He really didn't like big railroads, big businesses, and this sort of thing. But he also has, this kind of anti-racist backbone, that he's kind of skeptical of ideologies of racial hierarchy, which not all populists believed in, but some famous ones did. So Arthur Morgan would have been a populist, but not enough politics in the game. But I understand why they didn't include that.
Yeah, me too. All that civilization. Yeah, that's an excellent question. I think Rockstar Games definitely, they definitely felt some commitment to historical accuracy, but I think they may have felt a little more commitment to the Western genre in and of itself, and the cinema that has brought to us. One thing that I loved about working on Red Dead Redemption 2 was seeing all the references to the Wild West and to the Westerns that that became famous in and around, I think the first Western was in and around 1899, 1900, The Great Train Robbery. It's the oldest film genre we've got, and I love the references that Red Dead 2 has of them. Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid. We have the assassination of Jesse James by the coward Robert Ford. We have what's the Searchers? There's a shot in there that's straight out of The Searchers. Anyone who is a lover of film can't help but watch, and not just Red Dead either, but Grand Theft Auto as well for more modern cinema. But what I really, really appreciated and loved to see was all of the filmic references, which we have grown to love.
Dropping into our Q&A chat, this is kind of a similar question. Eric, did you want me to read your question, or would you like to? I will read it for him. So Eric asks, let's say, and this is for you, Tori, let's say a new game was being developed and the game studio wanted your input. What time period in history would a new video game be most helpful to you in developing and teaching a new course/book? And what historical character would you like Mr. Clark to voice in the game?
Oh, that's a great question. I love it. Well, so I'll give two alternate answers. I'll give my dream for a historical video game that I haven't seen made, and then I'll give my vision of what Red Dead Redemption 3 should look like, because I've thought about this a great deal. So I'll start with the Red Dead reference too, right? So if I were to be involved as a consultant in making Red Dead Redemption 3, which, by the way, I am available to do, just saying, putting it out there, in case anyone's listening who has power to do these things, I would like to see a third game continue the series' backward movement in time from 1911 to 1899 to like 1871. I want to catch Arthur at like age 18 or something like that, or maybe Hosea at age 25 or something, in part because the United States of the early 1870s was a lot more wild than 1899. In fact, so much of the wildness of Red Dead 2 is based around events that were really playing out in the 1870s, much more so than the 1890s. I mean, Roger already mentioned, open warfare between native tribes and the government. That's really not happening in 1899, but it's very much happening in 1871. Or take example, the Ku Klux Klan, which is briefly captured in this kind of encounter in the woods in Lemoyne. In 1899, the Ku Klux Klan was entirely dormant. It was underground. It did not really operate at all. But in 1871, they are very much a major political force, right? This major terrorist organization in the South. So I'd love, I often joke that Red Dead 2 is a great game about the early 1870s, but of course it's set in 1899, so some of the topics are a little strangely out of time. But a third game would really be set in actually the early 1870s, which would be just this crazy moment in American history, to be sure. Now, the quick answer on my other, a video game, a historical video game that I'd love to consult on that hasn't been made yet, I want to see a video game depict the Mexican Revolution.
Interesting.
This is during the 19-teens. Now, Red Dead 1 kind of does it a little bit, right? John Marston winds up in Mexico and hangs out with these revolutionaries, but it's a pretty thin engagement with the revolution. The Mexican Revolution is like the greatest, most epic narrative that so few Americans or Western Europeans know about. But it's got these amazing, huge, larger-than-life characters, Zapata and Villa and Diaz, all these figures that would make for an amazing video game because A, it's very violent, B, it's very dramatic. It's like all the big dilemmas of the modern world on this stage of Mexico in the 19-teens. So I want to see and play that game. Now, who would Roger Clark voice? I don't know. I think he'd make a good dictator in the game. He would be Porfirio Diaz, some version of that,
Oh, boy.
Just a total hard ass.
Yeah, that would be awesome. And don't forget, we don't voice them anymore. These are legitimate scenes and whatnot. I don't, Tori, your expertise in American history is greater than mine. I'd love to see a video game about Bolshevik Russia, and I want to be Rasputin. That would be fun. Because Rasputin doesn't die, right? So you could just keep playing forever and ever.
Apparently, he was a ladies' man that worked on some Romanov books.
And when you look at the photos, it's hard to understand. But
I
yes,
agree.
apparently
I
so. I
agree.
mean, he charmed the Empress, didn't he? My gosh. Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
we need more video game renditions of social revolutions in the 20th century. I mean, there's some, but none of them have like really gone big.
Yeah, and there is the Assassin's Creed series by Ubisoft, but again, there is a lot of artistic licenses to the accuracy there, and yeah, but
Even with the artistic license, like I never learned anything about the Mexican Revolution in school. And obviously I'm from the South, so we probably focused mostly on Civil War. But it would have been nice to have learned more about our country in other time periods. But Roger, I didn't mean to cut you off. Did you have anything else you wanted to say?
No, you're good. Thank you. No.
Good. Catherine Stoll, you are more than welcome to ask a question.
All right, howdy. Wait. Okay, there we go. Hi. Tori, I'm almost done with the audiobook. I just wanted to say, as someone who's got some vision issues, thank you for not making it an afterthought. It was clear that the audiobook was really important, and having Roger Clark narrating it was like so great. It was so cool. You did a great job. It's been so much fun to listen to. So also, thank you for handling any critiques or speculations about why developers made one choice or another with so much fairness and grace. I'm a game developer. I've been doing it for 7 years, and it's tough for me sometimes to pick up, speculative books about game development because you never know what perspective it's going to be met with, right? But it's inevitable that some level of speculation is going to be necessary. So I really loved reading things about, well, why did the game developers perhaps include this event, not include this event, or go into some things with more or less detail? So my question is, since the release of the book, and it's getting this really positive reception, have you had the opportunity to actually speak with any of the folks from Rockstar, the people who worked on the game from the narrative team or otherwise, who have been able to actually confirm or deny any of those ideas with you privately or publicly?
Yeah, great question. And thank you for your wonderful words of praise. They mean so much to me. With the audiobook too, it's funny because this book was in so many ways kind of born oral, because it started, like the rough draft started as lectures, in my class. And then they were converted into print for visual consumption, and then reconverted into oral by the masterful work of Roger, of course. So it's funny how it kind of comes full circle, but I think the orality of it is kind of there from the beginning, to be sure. So great question, like how much do I know about the creative process that Rockstar used to make this game, and have I had any engagement with them in the last 2 weeks since the book came out? The answer is nothing and no. So Rockstar is very, very secretive and kind of opaque about how they make their games, and I totally understand why. Like, they've got a magic formula, and they don't want anyone copying it, right? They want to keep things in-house, and they have very sort of measures put in place to keep that from happening. So I know next to nothing about how this game was produced and written and researched. The burning question that I had at the very beginning was, did they consult history PhDs in the writing of the script and in the framing of the sets and thinking through it and all that? And I still, all these years later, do not have a definitive answer to that question. And I have not had any formal contact whatsoever with anyone at Rockstar Games before or after the release of the book. So I don't. I mean, I'd love to, to chat with any representatives if they wished. But I hope that they see this book, as a compliment, right? I mean, as kind of a compliment to the depths that they went in creating this game. Yes, I mean, I am critical at times, as I have to be as a detached historian. But just the existence of the class and then the existence of the book, I see as a tremendous sort of, sort of praise for a commercial game studio that didn't have any mission to educate people. Their mission is to make money, and to do right by their staff and crew. Yet they've made so many references in here to big historical dilemmas that made it very easy for me as an educator, as a teacher, to take those references to the women's suffrage movement, to the practice of lynching, to the Ku Klux Klan. And while the game alone doesn't teach you the nuances of it, it allows someone like me an amazing opportunity to grab those references and then run with them all the way. So I have a tremendous amount of respect and for Rockstar Games, no doubt about that.
I could definitely tell when I was reading it. It was really refreshing and fantastic. So both of you, thank you for your work and thanks for answering my question.
Jeff, feel free. I know you had raised your hand previously as well. I think you're still muted, Jeff.
There we go. Now you can hear me. Sorry, yeah, I was raising it earlier and somebody asked the question, which you kind of already answered in a way. But then, Roger, you mentioned Assassin's Creed. And so I just wanted to sort of circle back to the question I had in relation. So I'm a huge video game nerd. I love history as well. Red Dead is hands down my favorite video game series of all time. What you just described for Red Dead 3, Tori, gave me goosebumps. I was like, that is exactly what they should do. The going back, keep going back is such an interesting concept too for video game development. But anyway, my question was sort of going to be about, I don't know if you're, Tori, just a very American history buff, or if you're a student of all, type of history. Assassin's Creed, as you said, Roger, does take some artistic license. There's even a fantastical element that's not in there, but they're also very historically based. Like, you run into a lot of real historical figures in fictional ways. And so I'm curious if you have ever played those, or if you have thought of this, Tori, of making, kind of a future of just finding video games that mess around in history and giving us the real scoop, because I think it's such a great idea. I would love, when I played the Assassin's Creed games, I wanted to find out more about the Borgias, when during the Ezio trilogy of those. Now they've got a Japanese one, which people have been begging for forever. And we've got Yasuke, which is a fascinating bit of history that has some legend, some real history, like what's real, what isn't. Like, these are topics I think are fresh and exciting. And if video games get people as excited about history as they do me, then this is a great opportunity to get kids even, who are getting older and learning more about history. So I'm wondering if you've considered any of that, if you've played some of these other video games, that kind of stuff.
Yeah, thanks, Jeff. Great questions. So that's I think the beauty of historical video games, is that while they alone may not teach you the full story, they get you really passionate and really excited about learning. I mean, I've found this out, in my classroom when students come in, like, wow, I really want to know about the Pinkertons, like they might not say that otherwise. So they're such a gateway to learning, which I don't think they get taken seriously enough as. So the Assassin's Creed series are great, right? And I think they're very interesting, sort of parallel to the Rockstar games, because they fictionalize much less. Like the Assassin's Creed Mirage is set in Baghdad. It's the 9th century. The names of real people, real religions, all that, right? Rockstar is much more sort of slippery, which lets them be take more liberties, like Roger mentioned. So I've only played a few, and here's the problem: in the professional historical business, right, in academia, we are not jacks of all trades. Unfortunately, we really tend to specialize. And outside of post-Civil War America, I can either be bad or simply embarrassing. So you don't want me teaching a class on the real 9th century Baghdad using AC Mirage. That would be so embarrassing, because my students would know more than I do at that point. So the problem is that there's no Assassin's Creed games that are set in that 150-year window that I know anything about. So otherwise, I'd be teaching about them left and right. There's such an amazing opportunity for that. And for my field, there's really a fairly limited number of games that are sort of low-hanging fruit for me to consider. I mean, Red Dead 2 was the most obvious. It's just like the richest, most nuanced, and such a popular game too. The ones I've thought about, I've been playing around with the idea of teaching another class that uses multiple games to try to understand 1900s, 20th century America, which starts with the Mafia series in the 1930s and 40s, goes into some of the Call of Duty games in the kind of mid-century decades with World War II and the Vietnam War. And then perhaps concluding with the Grand Theft Auto games that are set in the 1980s and 1990s. The problem is none of them are as smart and interesting as Red Dead Redemption 2, and none of them are really quite as popular or recent either. So we'll see. That Red Dead 2 was just very easy, a great fit, smart enough to teach with, popular enough to draw the students in. Roger, have you played the Assassin's Creed series?
I did this pirate one, Black Sails, I think it's called, and I've
That's
watched.
hands down the best one. It is
Yeah.
amazing.
I really, really enjoyed it, but I didn't get into it in enough detail to know how accurate it is. And I know that it's a vast, vast world that is enjoyed by many people. But yeah, I must play it more often because I love Japanese culture. So I might give the new one a blast. But they've done so many now: Roman, Greek, Babylonian, yeah, the Revolutionary War. It's yeah, they really what they've achieved, even down to the design and everything of the local fauna and the areas and the buildings and architecture. It's very impressive how much work they've put into it. It takes a lot of work.
I would bet that at any given American university, any set of history majors that they have, about 10% of them are there because of the Assassin's Creed games, right? People who just had that kind of a hook set in them and are curious to know the sort of bigger story. And if it's not Assassin's Creed, then it's Civilization, Age of Empires, Crusader Kings, those sorts of games as well.
And of course, we mustn't forget about probably the first Wild West video game that ever existed, the one that taught me what dysentery meant. I'm showing my age now, but we all remember. Yes, yes.
I loved
Yes,
Oregon
Sara Beth.
Trail. Now you're speaking my language.
Again,
the thing.
You know how much that taught me in the 80s? Yeah, go. What were you saying?
I think Red Dead Redemption 2 is this generation's Oregon Trail, right? In terms of influence and popularity and sort of, relevance. But Red Dead 2 is never to be found in your computer class in 8th grade homeroom or whatever, right?
No,
it's like
too
taboo,
too much, violence,
too much blood. But it's a better history than Oregon Trail. I think it's a much better version of Oregon Trail because it has such a greater diversity of perspectives. Because Oregon Trail is the view of a white family settling, moving westward, trampling on native land without any criticism of that whatsoever. While Red Dead 2 really rethinks, like any of those hero mythologies of Western settlement. It's much more like it's a scam. It's all being stolen. It's much more dark and critical than Oregon Trail was.
But the Oregon Trail, man, that was my heart. I remember when it came out, I was probably like kindergarten, first grade, my old Tandy computer. And then after that was Carmen Sandiego.
Yeah, where in the world? The thing that really hit me about Oregon Trail, though, too, was like, oh my gosh, I keep dying. And, and obviously that was there to underline the fact of how difficult it was for these first pioneers, expanding west. How many, for lack of a better word, bumps in the road there were. And I think it taught that excellently. It really hit home for me exactly how much these people were putting their lives at risk. And yeah, I think Red Dead 2 does dispel a lot of the mythical romance of the outlaw, which I think the entire Western genre as a whole has started to do too. Yeah. We have the black and white Westerns from the 40s and 50s that were excellent. High Noon, for example, one of the best ever made. But then we got Clint Eastwood coming up with Unforgiven, and I think it was 92 or 93, where, actually taking someone's life is addressed for perhaps the first time in a mature way in the Western genre. And it really made audiences look at the Western in a whole new way. And I would like to think that we achieved the same thing, as did Oregon Trail.
Teresa, you've had your hand raised. Feel free to ask your question.
Sure, thank you. So, Tori, when we were talking for Den of Geek, you were working on a lecture about animal conservation. Were there other things that you wanted to put in the book that were like not long enough for a full chapter, but what were some other like little bonus things. And then I had a question for Roger too at the end.
Yeah, thanks, Teresa. Yeah, so there was a lot that was on the cutting room floor with this book. Like there were lots of things I wanted to include. One of which is this chapter on like what's up with this teeming, overabundant wildlife in the West in the game. You know, herds of bison, you know, just moving across the landscape, deer coming out of every corner. That is really unrealistic because 1899 is like one of the real low points for wildlife populations in the US, just because it turns out for wild animals to live through the second industrial revolution was a terrible time to be a wild animal, right? I mean, you get hunting, deforestation, pollution. It's not good. Like the bison is almost extinct in 1899. But the one thing that really got cut that was a big part of my class was the sections of Red Dead 1 that take place in Mexico during the revolution. So that was a crucial part of my class when I taught it. But I just could not squeeze it into the book. It would make it too long. It would stretch it way beyond the sort of US foundations. And likewise with the Caribbean, you know, the whole chapter on Guarma in the game, I talked about extensively in the class as well. Because 1898 and 1899, those are big moments in American history when the US is expanding in this imperialistic mode out into the Caribbean. So the game kind of allows you to explore some of those questions, which I had in the class, but just didn't make the cut into the book. So maybe a second edition with extra chapters down the road.
I love that. Thank you. And Roger, I was just wondering if you could talk about some of the film projects that you have coming up this year, the ones you've been working on.
Oh, thanks, Teresa. Yeah, I've started producing a few shorts, and so what have I got on the cards? There's a vibrant filming community in New England that I had the pleasure of getting to know a little better during COVID. It was hard filming during COVID, but we got it. We got something done, and I've started to, get immersed into the horror genre as well as the Western now. So there's a feature coming out at the end of the year called Round the Decay that you'll see me in. And I currently have 2 short films doing the circuit, festival circuit right now. One of them is called Damn Handy, and you might recognize one actress in there by the name of Kylie Vernoff, who you may know better as Miss Grimshaw. That I filmed with Peter Filardi, who is an excellent filmmaking colleague of mine. That's going around. We're going to Cincinnati with that next. And I did another spoof kind of film noir 50s short film called A Death to Die For, which is very tongue-in-cheek comedy. That was a real blast to do. We shot that in black and white. And all of this is done in and around the Connecticut, New England area. So yeah, I love being in front of the camera as well as in front of the sensors or behind the microphone. I don't really say no to much, Teresa. So I just enjoy working, And thank you for asking. And yeah, Round the Decay comes out later this year. I hope you all like it if you get the chance to watch it.
Yeah, very excited for that. Anything with horror. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Teresa. And I'm just going to say, I see we have a few more questions in the chat. I'm going to close it after these guys and ladies. Casey, real quick, because we need to start wrapping it up, and then we'll have Mock and then Catherine.
Okay. Mr. Olson, I was just wondering, whenever you presented the idea of your class and your book, I think a lot of people don't really understand how powerful the medium of video games can be. They feature cinematography, acting, music, art, computer science. So whenever you presented the idea of your class in your book, did you receive any sort of challenges or pushback from people who may not have understood the medium?
Yeah, what a wonderful question. Yeah, I mean, I think video games still sometimes are seen as the kind of black sheep of the pop culture family, but really unnecessarily so. And I think it's changing slowly but surely, right? That more people are taking it seriously. But yeah, I mean, not that I got a lot of pushback, but I did have to sell this project to a lot of people who were not gamers. For example, I had to present my class to my senior colleagues in the history department who were both quite a bit older than me and have no experience with gaming at all, right? So they hear this pitch and they're like, we know nothing about Red Dead Redemption 2. but go ahead. We know you're going to do a good job with it. So, give it a shot. And then my agent, my literary agent, and my editor at St. Martin's Press, neither of them are gamers at all. But both of them were so excited and enthusiastic about bringing history to new audiences through this medium. And they recognized what I was doing and that it would be interesting to read, not just for the gamers, but for people who are outside of it as well. So, yeah, not so much pushback, but like people who are like, I don't know this genre that well, but I bet you're going to do a good job with it. And they know that there's such interest, there's such fascination among so many millions of people.
Oh,
You're muted, Sarah
you're
Beth.
muted, Sarah.
Apologies. Catherine, would you like to ask your question? And I just want to say your horse is perfect for this chat.
Oh, thank you. That's little Percy. I confess it was playing Red Dead that convinced me to get a horse. I'm dead serious.
That's awesome.
Okay, this one's for Mr. Clark. So a lot of gamers know you as a cowboy, right? They hear your voice and they picture Arthur Morgan. But is there like a character archetype that you dream of doing? Vampire, some other thing I can't think of.
Oh, well, no, I've luckily, I will always be known as Arthur, and that is a blessing in and of itself. But
Sure.
I love new challenges as well. I'd love to explore being the bad guy. I like villains, and one of the way I'd play a villain is I think if very often, when people try and portray an evil character, they go, oh, let's make him just bad and so mean, And I often think that sometimes falls a little short. I think what makes us most scared of villains is when we see a little bit of our own humanity in them, and they're showing it to us. When they show us a little bit of vulnerability and that they actually are capable of good, but they choose to be evil. I think in many ways that's even more scary. I'd love to explore that. I was lucky enough to be in another video game that didn't enjoy the same success as Red Dead 2, but it's still doing really well over in Europe. You'd get it done in about 5 or 6 hours. It's a sci-fi game called Fort Solace. It's set on Mars in the near future. And in that, I play an Irish engineer, nowhere near the prairie. And that was a real joy to work on, too. But to answer your question, yes, I would very much like to be a bad guy. I'd like to explore that.
Cool. Thanks.
Rasputin kind of has a...
Oh, yeah, he wasn't... He definitely had some ulterior motives, yeah.
Yeah.
They didn't like the influence he had over the
Royal family.
expiring Russian royal family.
I'm going to throw this over for our last question since Mock said that he no longer has one. Maribel, would you please ask your question? Or I can read it for you, actually, if you'd prefer.
Hi, yes, sorry.
It's okay.
I was just wondering, so Mr. Olson, in your opinion, who is the Vanderlyn gang most similar to, like referring to real outlaw gangs from history? I'm sorry, I have a little girl.
You're fine.
Yeah, thanks. That's a wonderful question. And it's also a really easy one to answer because I think there's only really one answer to it, and that is Butch Cassidy and his Wild Bunch. And there's such a neat replica of the Vanderlyn gang that I have a whole chapter devoted to the Butch Cassidy and his gang in the story. It's just so crazy. So they rob a very high-profile train in 1899. That the owner of that train line contracts the Pinkertons to try to get them.
So many
End up
parallels.
fleeing into Latin America. Like, it's totally insane how closely it matches. So like, Butch
even jumping off a cliff, right? Well, I can't swim. And then it was, well, the fall will probably kill you.
Yeah, so they copy both the real story of Butch Cassidy, who was a real flesh and blood outlaw, and of course the 1969 film with Robert Redford and Paul Newman. So there's other gangs that they draw upon, to be sure. But if you want a single equivalent based on timing and geography, gotta be Butch Cassidy and his crew.
I agree. And forget now. Here, I have a question for you, Tori. Was it at one point called the Hole in the Wall Gang, or was that was that Butch with a different group of
No,
guys?
they were the same names for the
Okay,
same,
yeah.
the different names
That's
for the same group of people,
That's
right?
what I thought.
Hole in
Yeah.
the Wall referred to this place, Robber's Roost, out in the sort of canyons of Utah and Colorado, where they used to hide out. And Wild Bunch just referred to their antics, to their kind of wild, raucous celebrations. But
Right,
they're basically the same group of people.
Yeah, yeah.
Thank you for answering that. I just wanted to say to Mr. Clark, I'm a big fan. Yeah, I really enjoyed your work, and of course in Red Dead Redemption. So
Thank you,
yeah.
Maribel. Glad you liked it.
I love the game. It got me through postpartum. So
I'm glad.
I was just going to say, as someone who has jumped off a cliff into water, I do not recommend that. Very painful. Thank you all for joining us today. I would not be this book's marketer if I did not ask you all to please leave your honest feedback on Goodreads, Amazon, Barnes & Noble, wherever you taught books, including social media. We want to hear from you. We want you to purchase this for your family and friends over this holiday season. But more importantly, just taking 5 minutes to leave a review can really help keep our books and help other people discover this. We really appreciate everyone being here today, and I will follow up with an email with the video link. And if you're not already following both Roger and Tori on social media, please do. And of course, thank you again for supporting our book in both the audio, hardcover, ebook, heck, all three. Thank you. We really appreciate it. Tori, last words, Roger?
Yeah, thank you, Sara Beth, so much for organizing this. It's been such a fun conversation. Roger, thank you so much for joining us this evening. It's always fun to see you. I've seen you in almost every corner of the US, but I've never seen you online. So this has been a real treat. But most importantly, thanks to everyone who came out. It's such a pleasure to meet you guys, to hear your really, really insightful and thoughtful questions.
Yes.
And then to hear your feedback on the book. I mean, it means so much to me, someone who's been sitting and working on something for so many years, to finally hear what people think when it's out in the world. Like, seriously, message me on Instagram, TikTok, my email. Just tell me what you think. Like, I'm really curious. It can be good and bad. I want to know criticisms too. But thanks everyone for coming out.
Thank you both. Everyone have a wonderful evening. Take care. Bye-bye.